Good morning and welcome to all of our listeners. This is the AI in Australia podcast, and it is our inaugural edition. So we're very excited to hopefully have you listening to us today. My name is Tim Mathis, and I am sitting with Sean Rolls. Nice to be with you today, Sean.
Morning, Tim. Hey, great to be with you, and welcome everybody. Our podcast, which all about AI, which I think people are hearing plenty of, but our job here is to dissect a lot of this stuff for you guys and to come across some of the big stories as well as the new innovations that both Tim and I are going to scrape and give to you in a nice, what do you want to call it, Tim, a bite-size,
digestible bits of AI.
Yeah, pure. We don't say pure as medication. It's more about and not recommendations, because plenty of that there. But I suppose, digestible pieces, bites. We can come up to nuggets. What do you want to call it?
Little gold nuggets of AI. I think they're everywhere at the moment. And really, it is a space at the moment that's just so confusing and so frothy, and there's so much going on and so much hyperbole, and really difficult to try to get a grip on what's real and what's relevant. And we hope that we're going to be able to guide you a little bit in that journey. Maybe just a quick introduction to who we both are. I'm an ex-management consultant. I think once a management consultant, unfortunately, probably always are, but I have spent a lot of time. I consider myself a veteran in Gen AI, which means I've got 2 years experience. So that's pretty much as much experience as anybody has in the Gen AI world at the moment, but absolutely fascinated by it. I've helped organizations with a lot of other types of transformation projects as well. And this is the really big shift that's happening, probably a once in a generation shift. So I think we're incredibly lucky to be alive to live through it and to hopefully share a little bit of our learnings with our listeners and our customers.
Super. And then I'm Sean Rolls. I'm a senior advisor with the EDM Council. For those who don't know, but most big organizations are a member of it, where I basically advise and also train and coach organizations in the areas of knowledge graph, cloud data management and data, and particularly with AI-ready data. So my take on this is that most of my experience has been helping organizations get ready for their data to be ready for now AI, particularly with the things that manage context and meaning and intelligence for the I in the AI, which is where the knowledge graph as well as the data that goes into it. So we hear the things about crap in, crap out. So part of this is I've got the data hat on in terms of without the right data, people, your AI will only be a horizon of fluff or froth, as Tim called before, and we want you to actually get some nuggets out of this. So most of my experience has been helping organizations to get to that good and intelligent space of data.
And we're definitely going to have more technical conversations about the importance of data. It's all about data. But I think today we're going to start just with some of the big news and kind of what's going on. I remember doing a presentation 2.5 years ago at an event where we put forward 2 scenarios to the audience. The one was that AI would just be a useful helper, and everybody would have an AI in their pocket, and we'd reach this age of really efficient workers. And the other was that there was going to be massive reorganization of the workforce, job losses. And here we are 2 years down the line. Like, what's happening? What's happening in the jobs market? I think that's the question everybody wants to know. Are they safe? What's happening in the businesses? Is this going to be, I'm not going to be replaced by an AI, but replaced by a person with an AI? Or are AIs actually replacing people? Sean, what are you seeing? What is your sense of where this is going? And
so it's a really suppose most important topic, Tim, that you mentioned at the beginning, excitement of AI, the curiosity, but I think we should really touch on too that the stress that AI is causing people because of their job, people's uncertainty of, like, almost every week we're seeing stuff in the news about people's jobs are going to be replaced by robots, and graduates getting replaced by AI agents. So from what I'm seeing, I'm advising a couple of big banks here in Australia on the AI. I'm seeing they're all using AI to help do their job in terms of in a faster and automated way, which is basically changing the entire role of what they've been doing in the past. So before, people used to code in SQL, do PowerPoints and do a lot of presentations. Now a lot of that stuff is all done by AI. So they're actually switching how they use their intelligence or the human experience in ways of creating new ways of use cases for for their organization using the different tools of AI, which we're about to go through, which these new tools of AI are hitting the market every week. So part of it is that I'm seeing people spending a lot of the time exploring and testing the new stuff, as well as evaluating, oh, how does AI do this? Like stuff with Copilot and doing presentations. So it's basically, it's almost like you and I were discussing the other week. It's like a carnival. People are going on different rides, going, oh, let's try this, let's try that. But there's no real quite orchestration or coordination of how this is coming together. So it's still a bit much like, a free for all or choose your own adventure.
I mean, it's definitely an unsettling time, and I think there can be no debate, to my mind at least, that this is not just I remember people talking about this as a glorified autocomplete. AI is nothing but a glorified autocomplete, and I think the reality is that it is now very much encroaching on certain functions and certain tasks, and certain businesses are going to be more at risk than the others. I saw two interesting news articles cross my desk this week. The one was that BCG has hired 1,000 AI engineers. So they're doubling down to say that this is going to be an age of mega abundance for them, and it's on the implementation side. I've also seen a headline that says that McKinsey's has silently let their natural attrition reduce their workforce by 10% over the last 6 months, down from 45,000 to 50,000. So if you're chasing the billable hour and your business model is the billable hour, and your first line triage is with junior administrative staff, whether that's in a law firm or a junior analyst in a consulting firm, I do think there are going to be some significant shifts there. But the real question, Sean, is does the abundance change? Does the amount of value that gets created in the system go away, or is there more? So, and what I mean by that is, if AI is doing the work of people, and it's doing the work of people more efficiently, and that value is still getting sold to the market somewhere, it breaks out as an exchange for value, then this isn't ultimately a job. One or two theses can be right. The one is that some organizations are going to make much more money with fewer people, or there's going to be a reorientation of the workforce. The nightmare scenario would be one where less things get created and sold, and that causes economic contraction, which I don't see that scenario playing out at all. I think the risk here is more concentration of wealth, but not a reduction in kind of net wealth in the system. And if you relate it back to jobs that way, I think that would be kind of my view. What do you think?
Yeah, I think these are the big unknowns. As again, as we were just discussing, preparing for this, is that we're all experiencing one of the biggest shifts that in our lifetime, in terms of for me, like having working in data for almost we're coming up to almost 25 years. I've never seen a shift like it before. So it's hard to anticipate just where the different impacts are, but at least from seeing like different big shifts that have been leading up to it, like when we see the shift in big data and we saw the shift to the cloud, they had a big impact of how organizations use data, as well as productivity and so-called the promise bit, and they became like fads. But with AI, because of the amount of potential, I can really see a huge potential in innovation. So the gains of like new propositions to customers, new ways of how customers can engage and using agents. Definitely the gains and the benefits that organizations can provide as new income streams and new value propositions. That's a huge potential, but it comes down to like back to the humans, like how ready is an organization to, once it pilots these into using AI, is it sustainable? Is it scalable? And what's your view of that? Because you've run a lot of organizations that have scale and big experience in the space. How difficult it is to, like, somebody who's got a new toy, goes great, can do all these things, to plug it into their organization as a new business model and then scale it like it can't be plug and play, can it?
So I mean, I think that's there's so much in that. I think firstly, just to touch on the first part that you spoke about, there's never been, and I'll come back to your question, there's never been a time in the history of people and organizations building things when it's been quicker and easier to go from concept to product market fit. There's almost nothing right now, at least in the digital space, that you can't just dream up and do. Any person with access to a code GPT, a cursor, or we'll touch on it a bit later, but OpenAI has just released their coding agent called Codex. Anybody with an idea, a computer, and $20 a month for a premium subscription can build almost anything through this notion of vibe coding. So there's definitely going to be an
like that,
absolute
isn't it?
explosion of value, and people testing and iterating around stuff to build. The question that's going to come into focus really soon is, what does the market actually want? Because you're now suddenly going to have, because there's no barriers to entry, you're going to get quite a lot of, I think there's going to be, it almost reminds me of a big extinction event in evolutionary history, where you just have this explosion of new things, but not that many are going to win out. Like, you're still going to have to stay close to your customer and understand what problems you're really solving for. And I think there's a really big lesson in that. I think that this is the big shiny new toy, and because you can build anything, that doesn't mean you should. So some of the founding principles of value creation and ensuring that you get your product market fit quickly, and that you're actually solving one of the fundamental customer problems of the customers that you serve, it's probably easier than it's ever been to lose sight of that. And maybe that's a lesson that people sitting in executive positions understanding, because make no mistake, there's a lot of pressure at the moment in the market to show wins. There's conferences on the go at the moment. People are set on, up on the stage at an AWS conference. What are the amazing things that you're doing as an organization right now to show the win? So make sure that those are real things. I think that would be kind of lesson number one. And then to your question, Sean, we're going to talk about this idea of the great Reformation today. So why it's different, why it's not transformation this time. And that might be the thing that changes the trajectory. But in general, organizations that are agile in their DNA, organizations that have actively pursued innovation and created the space for people in their businesses to innovate, not spoken about innovation, but driven it down at a KPI level, harvested some of the EBITDA back into innovation, into Skunksworks teams, businesses that have got CEOs who are visionary and understand that no business model will persist forever. Those business models that are truly agile and the vision is driven by the CEO will again be the businesses that are able to adapt to this wave of change fast. Businesses that are full of cultural inertia, slow stayed businesses that have been driven by incumbent managers who are frightened of change and whose job it is to keep the status quo, those businesses are going to suffer an accelerated threat because of incumbents that are going to grow around them faster than ever before.
I feel just pausing that because this is a really big, really important point, and this is what I'm hearing across basically almost every client, as well as when I've done some pilots both in sport and in organizations. The common quote I keep hearing is that if we don't act now, we're going to be left behind. So there's a huge sense of scaredness. Oh, isn't the word?
Fear is the word you're looking for.
Being left behind on the change, and that's where I think, to your point, like those who are ready to adapt, and this is where this is such a big thing about change management. Those, whether it be technology or data or whether it be just innovation, they can leverage the AI advantage the quickest. But at the end of the day, if your organization has not been have a strong ability to change and adapt, then, and this is where the Gartner conferences and a lot of articles about having your data ready for AI, that AI can't fix underneath the hood overnight. And that's where I think we're going to see that sort of breakaway between those companies who can leverage AI to accelerate and adapt versus those who haven't done, as you said, who have been slow to change and very much like a closed shop who go, oh, let's do AI. We can't be left behind. But they're going to have a huge amount of work of getting the transformation or basically adaptation to be ready for AI to get the benefits. And I don't know how you see it, Tim, in terms of there's no shortcuts, is there? Like if you're a company who hasn't been able to adapt and you don't have the right data and right technology to work with AI or the people, well, where are you going to be left behind?
So there are no shortcuts, except that there might be some shortcuts for startups. So that's my caveat. But I think that the reality is, this reminds me of this. I'm sure you've heard of the idea of the overnight startup $1 billion success story that took 10 years to build. So
Yeah.
that's what's happening here as well. The big businesses that are going to capitalize on the space the most are the ones who've invested methodically in their data assets over the last decade.
Yeah.
The ones who were obsessed with single view of the customer when that was a thing. They were building data lakes, they were building layers of meaning, semantic layers, ways of associating disparate data sources into a common, accessible, single store.
Yeah.
Now you've got this incredible tooling that you can go and unleash upon that data.
Yeah.
Businesses that are highly regulated, extremely fragmented, and have been running their mainframes in isolation, different lines of business, they're going to struggle. But those businesses still need to do the hard work, put in the hard yards to capitalize on this and capitalize on this well. Unfortunately, if you're a big enterprise, you need to get the data layer right. And we will definitely talk about this more. There is no shortcut right now that I can see. But the good news as well is that any good business wants to have a competitive advantage. And sometimes the competitive advantage that a business has is just the discipline of doing business well. And that will cut down into functions like your data management.
Yeah.
So I don't think that right now AI is going to be the great equalizer. I don't think this is something that you just go and plug in and everybody gains the same benefit from it.
Yeah.
I think that that's a lot of the positioning in the market is all of the incredible stories of how people just sort of plug AI on top and it solves all of the complexity of the businesses. But there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of risk. I don't think it's that surprising to see that if you look at the news stories this week, one of the ones that came out was very much around the extent to which some of the big four are focusing on AI assurance. So making sure that AI is reliable, data is safe. This is the big danger that's going to present itself at the intersection of the pressure that CEOs are feeling to transform their businesses from AI and the reality of not having well-established guardrails in your data space. The result is that there are going to be some high-profile casualties of early adopters who haven't got their data right.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. That's spot on, and that's what we're going to be for those of you who want to hear about all those things. These are the future podcasts coming up. We'll be doing deep dives into each of those areas because of back to when you mentioned, Tim, like there's no shortcuts. There is 100% no shortcuts, but there are accelerators, and that's where hence that Tim and I will be sharing some accelerators that we've worked with clients today who have actually demonstrated those accelerators that work. But at the same time too, if you want, what's the quickest way to get AI in? If you haven't done the foundations, that's where like the data management, the guardrails, then you're basically going to have a risk of things blowing up in your face, whether it be breaches, regulation, customers basically not expecting certain things. So hence the risk here is really big if you don't put the effort into the AI foundations because of, if you have a black box, we all know what happens if you don't understand what goes in underneath it. So for those of you really who come from the governance angle or the data management or those in tech, we'll be hitting each of those areas and how they come together for this huge appetite of AI benefits and advantages. And I think, Tim, like I suppose I've been looking at what's been coming through for some of the hyperscalers. Like we've seen some recent demos from Google. You were at the AWS summit last week. What's been really exciting is how a lot of the governance as well as the guardrails that these hyperscalers are providing. With Google have something it's called like a model garden. So I think of it as an analogy that AI is all over your garden. Well, of course you can't let it grow out of control. You've got to look after it. You've got to maintain it. You have your herb patch. You have your vegetable patch, and that's and we'll go through that with you down the track. It's the same thing with AI. You need to basically categorize it into different types and the different types of data, and then manage that like in a modular way to keep control and to manage it and to govern it. Otherwise, your AI will take control over yourself, and then basically you don't understand what you have underneath you, and you basically have a jungle.
I was wondering how long you were going to extend the garden analogy. So you got all the way to a jungle. That's impressive. Got to get rid of those weeds.
So we can we'll go when we have that whole session on the podcast about we can have an AI garden and we can all take our different patches of it. And I think And that's where I suppose, you got the
But
different toolings, and you got the different data types, and we got different, acronyms of RAGs and LLMs, and like I said, people are overwhelmed. Like the amount of questions I get asked
overwhelmed.
each week. What does that? What does an LLM stand for? What does a RAG stand for? Versus those who just drop like, I'm using Anthropic, and it's like people. There's no common language that people just drop in acronyms and terminology, and because things are moving so fast, there's a presumption, like executives who feel that sort of exposed, but some going, oh, I should know this stuff. I can't keep up reading the things, versus those who are like exploring things like crazy, going, yeah, try this, try that. And so, look, what's your view, Tim, like at the speed that is moving, when you have executives trying to have a strategy and they get asked by the CEO, well, how do we move forward and what's the roadmap? And then you got the employees underneath who want to try everything and having all these innovation sprints. What's the balance between those different movements?
I think this reminds me of a conversation I had about 25 years ago with a friend of mine about insurance. And I remember getting to the conclusion as I was learning to be an adult, how much should I know about insurance? And the answer was, I need to know enough to know whether or not the broker's telling the truth or trying to sell me a yarn. And, then that conversation matured to, how much should I know about car? And the answer is that when I take my car to the clinic, I need to make sure that the guy doesn't try to replace the engine when the engine is absolutely fine. Like, I need to know enough to know that the skilled guys are doing the right stuff. And I need to know what the latest car is, like what a car can do, like whether or not it's electric. So I think, let's move back into the realm of the real and not just metaphor. But I think the answer for the executive is that the answer for most people right now is that you have to care about AI. There is no possibility it's not going to touch your life. Get over that. AI is going to be, is already a disruptive force. You're living in denial if you think it isn't going to change everything. There is no world in which AI is not going to change everything and at an accelerating rate. Okay, so make peace with that. Now, what do? You cannot be an expert in everything. It's impossible. There's just too much. But you have an obligation, if you're a leader, a senior executive, or a CEO, to understand what's really going on in the space. You need to have some trusted sources of data that help you understand what the big trends are and to cut through the noise to the signal. So what's really happening? And it's very important that, because there's a lot of media grabbing going on. I remember Klarna, who are an organization who probably 18 months ago now stole the headlines by saying that they were reducing their workforce by 800 people because they'd automated their contact centers. And the day they released that result, that piece of media, Teleperformance's share price dropped by 15%. Billions were wiped off the stock exchange because everyone thought this is the end of the traditional call center. Fast forward 12 months and the guys were like rehiring humans. And a lot of it was just hyperbolic media grabbing. Okay, so you don't want to be led in that way. As a CEO of an organization, you should be able to discern what's real from what's hyperbole. But make no mistake, there are going to be stories like that. That is coming. And you want to be the CEO of a business that is driving towards the real outcomes. Because suddenly, and by suddenly, somewhere between now and 2 years and 5 years, businesses who've put in the hard work are going to be fundamentally transformed in ways that you can't then catch up with because they're doing the work of the transformation now. So, in short, what should you be doing as a business? You should be plugging into knowledge sources. And I'm going to do a shameless punt for us, Sean. Masterclasses. You should be going to masterclasses to understand what can be done so that if you're a senior manager sitting in front of your development team, and you getting blowback from the dev team saying that I need to continue to code in my Notepad IDE, writing native Python, and ensuring that I know what the syntactically correct coding is, that guy needs to leave your organization. You need to understand the power of code GPTs as an enhancing tool, and you need to know what it is. You need to be able to see it in action, and you need to be driving the messaging and creating the space for your teams to learn and adapt and evolve. And you need to have trusted partners who can help you with knowing what to know. Let me pause there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's spot on. I think just what you talked about just at the very end there is really key in terms of, like, the executives, they need to be we have a picture or a character in one of our training notes for on the EDM Council, like a guy with a shield. So the executives need to be that shield in terms of knowing enough to ask questions. Like I say, if a team says, "Oh, let's go all into Gemini," or "Let's go all into Bedrock," they need to know enough at a high level. Or what is Gemini, which is the Google's Gemini, and Bedrock is AWS for those who don't know. Because of if let's go all in without knowing what the alternatives are and what the impact are, then you're basically going blind. So it's getting an overview of the landscape, which is and hence with our plug of our master series that we're doing training. But we're going to help. Our mission is to help provide people with that clarity, so that they can make this overview shield of what do I let in, what things do I basically say straight away no, but also to not have to think that they know everything, because they can't know everything.
Yep.
And then on the second point about like trusted advisors, I know there's been a big push away from consultants over the last couple of years, particularly with data and trying to have people in-house. Well, that's basically going to be overturned by, you cannot rely on people inside your organization to be the ones who know how the AI landscape is actually working. There's too much going on. It's like trying to, the analogy that people could say that it's trying to change the airplane mid-flight. You can't do both. So when people in an organization, if you ask them what's your view on, certain things in AI, they're only going to know a certain amount because they're doing their job. They only have an X amount of time to read about these things, versus us who are basically, interviewing, working, go to conferences. So, and then distilling those as a trusted advisor and trainer to help provide these executives and employees an impartial and keeping an impartial view of what is actually out there, for them to take that knowledge back into the organization to make their assessment. And I think the balance between the two is going to help the organizations to manage their time effectively, but also to take those nuggets of information that we're going to provide, as well as not having to be drowning in just froth of AI that's all over the place.
I agree with you, and I think look, I mean, consultants are the massive perverse incentive in consultancy is the billable hour, and we will talk about the billable hour and the fact that the billable hour is unequivocally dead in a future podcast. But that is the enemy. That is the moral hazard of consulting, is the fact that consultants go into organizations and they are conflicted because the longer they can protract their engagements and bill hours, the better for them. I think what you want is a thought leadership partner, people who are living and breathing the space, obsessed with it, love it, find it interesting, and can use that married with business knowledge. And again, this sounds like shameless self-promotion, but I think both you and I have sat in executive positions. We understand the organizational dynamic. We understand corporate inertia. We understand the role of people in the business and all that goes with that, but also the opportunity. We also understand what's happening here. So arm yourself. I think arm yourself with knowledge. Find people who you trust to be your thought leadership partners. And you touched on such an important thing. People don't resist change necessarily for the sake of it. Many people would love to embrace AI, but if you are sitting in an organization where you've got to bill 8 hours a day on some other job, when are you going to learn to do that? It's absolutely
exactly and that's a stress. Like, this is where hence that there was some research from Gartner for those who are going to the conference in Sydney in a couple of weeks' time. Sorry to spiel to steal just on the people, but having seen the presentation from the London conference a couple of months ago, there was some research, but like saying that I think it's like 70% of people find are stressed in the jobs of AI and data. So, and that stress isn't going to go away. It's actually going to go up because of it's like when people in the organization get thrown, oh, check out what AI can do, and hence our podcast isn't going to do any favors because they're given more things to play around with. But the only time they can play around with this and learn about it is outside their job, because if they're playing with this new tool, they're managing to going, what are you doing playing with this? You got a job to do. So what's the alternative? Unless their job is part of it is that X amount of their day is to actually learn and explore the new areas of AI, which maybe that could be part of their role descriptions down the track. But right now, I'm not seeing that change. So people are spending like days and nights looking at LinkedIn, getting emails from people like, oh, check out this. And this is causing them stress and anxiety, like, oh, if I don't learn this stuff, my job is going to be under threat by somebody coming in. So there's a lot of pressure from employees as well as new employees coming into an organization.
So all of this is important. I mean, an organization that cultures, so much work has been done on psychological safety in the workplace and its links to performances of organizations. And this is a big existential threat. A lot of people are going to be feeling very unsafe. They're hearing that their jobs are going to be automated, yet at the same time, they've got to deliver their jobs that they're currently doing. So what's going to happen and how? And, I mean, this reminds me, I remember working with software development teams years ago where people were running manual processes, and the manual processes would take them 6 hours. And I'd say to them, how long would it take you just to automate this process? Just write a script that does this. And so it takes 6 hours. And I'd say, well, then do it. And they're like, yeah, but I've got to do the 6 hours of work first to do it. Like, they couldn't uncouple themselves from the idea of they're stuck in the workload that they have, and that doesn't create enough space even to undo their own workload through smart automation. And, if that work took 24 hours, 3 days, then when would they do it? Because they had to do the manual every day. They had to do that workload of 6 hours of work. So they do not have 24 hours to automate it. So even though 24 hours would the long-term return there is all of that work fully automated forever, they simply didn't have the 24 hours to get it done. So that plays out now too. This is initially more work, not less work, and then there is more abundance. I want to make one more point, and then I want to go back to this concept of hyperscalers. And I think, Sean, we must keep each other honest here. You and I have got a lot of jargon in our head. Even the word hyperscaler might not be known to all of us. But before I do, some of the business fundamentals, people lose this. A business can think about, in quite crude terms, increasing its fitness by increasing its sales. Okay, so selling more things, and that might be expansion of not selling more of its existing widgets or services, or expanding its services. It can also think about it in terms of optimizing its internal processes. Typically, those are the two, broadly speaking, big levers of what will ultimately lead to more EBITDA. So how do I increase my revenue line, and how do I decrease my cost line? Okay, so internal operations is a proxy for cost, and the widgets that I sell as a proxy for my revenue line. There's a third dimension to running a business always, which is governance. Okay, so like that's something that unfortunately isn't necessarily in the short term related. It's not directly related to cost of goods sold or your SG&A, but it exists as a liability to some extent, an obligation, a legal obligation. Now, if you just take those three things, can you relate your AI activities directly back to one of those? Because if you can't, you're in no man's land, and you are just using the tooling for the shininess of the tool. But it sounds overly simplistic, but are you doing something that's increasing your internal operational efficiency, mitigating internal risk, or increasing the volume of your sales? Because if you aren't, like, what is it? And I think that pin sharp clarity around how your initiatives are going to be sponsored by executives and then disseminated in the organization, one shouldn't lose sight of that. It is to some extent that simple.
Actually, you've just hit the spot on. I think if we had to have one big focus of people to take away today with the AI, is to really connect that you have the garden of AI out there, but connect to, I've always been with the mantra of what's the business problem you're trying to solve, or basically 100%. How is this going to create business value? And I think both you and I, Tim, are very passionate about this in terms of creating business value and having that, bring it back to how does this relate to the business model of the organization, rather than fall in love with the latest tech or tech-driven solutions, which ultimately most of the time do fail because of that spend doesn't connect back to the business value of the organization. So I really want people to take that, what Tim just mentioned there, to really, when you start exploring these AI tools, they can do some amazing things, but you've got to bring it back into your own organization. How will these amazing things help me do things cheaper, quicker, easier, or more automated? And how will that solve by certain use cases, and do like an MVP, or basically how will this create anticipated either profit or growth? And if you can't answer those questions, basically you go on a ride that without knowing what's going to happen, afterwards. And that's where that question to use that to all those of you in organization, think of it of that is what's the business problem trying to solve, or what's the opportunity back to my unique organization.
I agree with that completely. And just to round up on this week at the AWS conference that I'm sure many of our listeners have attended, it was interesting to hear the CX narrative is back at the center. So we a lot of organizations are now saying,
what's for those people who don't know what CX? What's CX for the
CX is customer experience. So customer
Okay.
experience being one of the main dimensions that a business can differentiate on. So there's so many models, so many consulting models, but one is that an organization should have at least, you need to have sub minimums in 3 dimensions, but you need to differentiate on one, and those dimensions are customer experience, operational efficiency, or product excellence. So you'd say like a business like Amazon is operationally excellent, a business like Apple has product supremacy, and then customer intimacy or customer experience, a business like Zappos. Those were the businesses that kind of highlighted those. So you need to be, you need to have enough in each one of them. But customer experience for the last decade has been the battleground of many businesses. How do we create? And it started with segmentation. How do I take my customer base and divide it into 6 or 7 segments of like similar people? And I'm going to give those. You're going to end up, Sean. You are going to be segment A, and segment A is all basically going to get the same stuff. And I'm going to be segment B because I'm much younger than you, and I'm going to get other stuff, right? Now, what became the narrative was hyper personalization, segments of one, and that was the fantasy. That was the fantasy that businesses were pursuing. How do I understand the journeys of every unique customer and give them just the right stuff that they want? And that narrative is now going through a big resurgence because of the promise of this ability of large language models to understand your propensities, understand your longitudinal journey. So nice to see that. Nice to see that. I mean, that is a key differentiator, and I think that was very much on topic at the AWS conference. People talking about customer experience again, personalization, hyper personalization. So I think that's well on the mark. But it requires good data. You're not going to get there without having good data.
Well, that's exactly, and it's when you touch on one of my favorite topics that I specialize in knowledge graphs. That's been one of the top use cases that we've been focusing with banks for over 10 years. The customer 360, or the 360 view of the customer, which is basically, for those who don't know about knowledge graph, think of it as a spider web of relationships. Hence, every customer has different relationships. We'll go into that down the track, and that's where hence the AI can do that for you. But if the data about the customer and the products is bad data, then your 360 view won't be a 360 view. It'll be like a 5% view. So hence the data and the technology needs to be connected. There is no free ride. There's no shortcut. There's no quick fix.
If you have a 5-degree view of your customer, you'll soon have a 180-degree view of them in the rear mirror as they leave you.
Exactly. And then there'll be you have a big thing of churn. Like the next use case is that why am I experiencing so much churn in my customers? And then you have a diagnostic as opposed to selling a new opportunity. So that's where a lot. And I get asked this all the time. We want to copy the solution you did for X about how they use the graph for 360 view. And yes, you can copy the solution, but you can't copy the approach of the like you mentioned, Tim. The people, the change, and adaptation of how to do it. So hence, and this is why you and I are passionate about training and masterclasses, that people are going to need to be trained up in this way. And with us being honest here, we are neutral. We don't work for an Amazon or a Google. We don't take sponsorship. We're we're there to train people out there to help you be the best in the space, because there's so many people out trying to sell you something or sell you the AI everything, which is it just isn't going to give you the short wins. So with that is that taking the steps of the 360 view of the use cases, to follow the steps, and Tim and I will walk you through those steps and about how to do those in a way that is no BS, as well as when trying to sell your stuff, we're just trying to transfer that knowledge and our experience in a way that you don't repeat the mistakes that other people are doing and only go backwards rather than forwards.
Well, that's right. I mean, you just want to minimize the amount of time it takes to get to value. I think that's how we see our role. I just want to touch on hyperscalers, and then let's talk about this idea of the Great Reformation. I mean, there's just so much to always talk about in the AI space. It's hard to know where to draw the line. But you spoke about the Googles and not being aligned to anybody. I think for our listeners, you're going to hear this word hyperscaler a lot, and the hyperscalers are the big tech platform providers. So They're really the Googles, the AWSs, Microsofts of the world. And what they say, and this is something that I want to repeat it because it wasn't always obvious to me, like what they do. They describe themselves as the ingredients to build the cake. And that's the way to think about it. And Sean and I were fortunate enough to listen to some of the latest offerings from Google this week and what's happening out of their agentic offering. Agentic is something we'll talk about. But the hyperscalers, what they're going to do is they're going to give you the tooling that you can use to drive your AI adoption in your organization. And we'll have a dedicated podcast about this because there's pros and cons to working with a hyperscaler. But one of the big pros is this concept of vertical integration where they own a lot of the data already. So if you can imagine as a business, you're running, let's say, Gmail, Enterprise Google, Google for Business. It's got access to all of your emails, all of your calendar invites. Everything is stored on G Drive. And then you want to make a migration from there into building agents. You can understand that the step from all of that activity that's happening in your organization and access to that data into an agent is already there. So a lot of that data problem is solved. A lot of that integration problem is solved. And that's the concept of vertical integration. It's a really big argument for going with a hyperscaler. The same with Microsoft. Everything's happening on Teams. All of your emails happening in Outlook. You're using Copilot a lot already. You've got SharePoint. All those things. Building these layers of abstraction on top are going to give you quite big advantages. But it doesn't happen automatically. You have to go and build it. And those hyperscalers don't build it for you. They are desperately looking for use cases and implementations and success stories that just providing you the ingredients to build the cake. You have to go and build the cake, and you need to know how to build the cake. And building the cake can flop. Look at me, I'm building a good cake analogy. The cake can flop if you don't have the right temperature in the oven. And these are the things like the guardrails that we're talking about and that are going to become incredibly important. So I just wanted to leave you the concept.
There's been the news over the whole week, which I'm getting quite sick of, is about the mushroom story. The woman who basically poisoned to, allegedly, it's a court case now. So I'm sure all of you heard about the same thing with Tim's cake analogy. That if you don't have the guardrails and governance, if you use the wrong tool or the wrong data, you're going to poison your organization. That people will use the AI in the wrong way, which will do some damage to your customers. The cake was undercooked, or it can be overcooked or overbaked, and basically a cake becomes a pizza, and then people are going, I asked for a cake, why am I getting a pizza? So then you're going to find the hyperscalers going, oh, but our tools work, which they do work, but hence it's the people in your own organization to follow the recipe and the guardrails and governance, so that what you start off with having, it ends up in a way that you expected, like on the back of a box when it says, this is how it should look like, that needs to be followed in the way that the guardrails and the op model and the training and knowledge that you get with the AI and the hyperscaler.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the Great Reformation. So this concept, let me tee it up quickly because it's an important one. And we asked the question about whether or not innovation will happen suddenly, whether businesses can leapfrog or not. And I want to just lay down, and we don't have to agree on what's going to happen here because we don't really know. But in the past, organizations that needed to go through digital transformation, so let's take the last big cycle of business transformation was the digital transformation cycle. Businesses had manual analog processes. If I wanted to get something done, if I wanted to send a message to a colleague, if we go back far enough, I'd write a handwritten note and I'd walk across to my colleague and put that handwritten note down, and then they might lose it, they might not, and they might do something with it. Many, many processes were like that in some form. So big consulting firms went in and said, this is senseless. We need to have database entries. We need to take any manual process, analog manual process we can find, and we're going to digitize it. We're going to turn it in, take it from atoms to bits, and we're going to, in the process of doing that, we're going to yield not only operational efficiency, but accuracy as well. So things are going to get faster and more accurate. Government's digitized. We moved away from paper processes to online application forms, etc., etc. Now, the process of digitization or digital transformation, and there were subtleties, there were differences between digitization and digitalization and all sorts of things. But what it required us to do is go and send in business analysts, and the business analysts would go and have to map out processes start to end. How do I get from the initiation of a home loan to the granting of a loan? Show me all the forms you have to fill out, every single one of them. Let's look for the overlap. Let's see how we can consolidate this and build out these user journeys and then build digital assets to replace it. So a real transformation was required. You had to get your hands dirty. You had to go and understand what the existing process was, and brick by brick, you had to replace the manual with the digital. The question that we face now is AI transformation going to follow the same process? Or is there a new emergent trend that's going to allow organizations to leapfrog? And it looks something like this. Rather than remapping existing processes, rebuild them from the ground up using AI with only knowing what's required from a, let's say, legislative or compliance perspective and what the customer outcome is, and knowing nothing of the internal processes and not trying to replace them at all. The reason that this is an attractive idea, and we're going to coin this the great Reformation rather than transformation, is that the time to build has come down orders of magnitude and continues to come down orders of magnitude. You can practically fire up software on demand now using code GPTs. And rather than being constrained, the big constraint in transformation was this concept of legacy debt, development debt, legacy code, legacy systems. There might be a one-off opportunity to not go that route at all and to build alongside. There are significant casualties in this approach. I can use an example to say, imagine I went into a marketing department of copywriters, graphic designers, social media experts, and I looked at that department of 15 people and said, well, how many of these functions are actually required today? Let me just have a look at what's been produced. It's 20 tweets, 3 video ads, whatever the output is that actually comes out the other side of this human-based factory. And I'm going to go and rebuild that whole function using digital tooling. And when it's ready and when it can produce the same outcome, I'm going to swap out that new hyper-efficient, reformed business process for the one that is currently much more overhead intensive. I'm not going to transform it. I'm going to reform it. That's the concept. Sean, what are your thoughts? I mean, this is obviously, it's scary. It would be something that would cause workplace displacement, no doubt. I can also see it being very attractive as an idea for executives looking for cost savings. And is it viable?
Yes. So first of all, it's bringing it in terms of people to be aware of that, because of particularly going back to consultants, their typical answer is, "Oh, we need to start with the transformation. Here's the scope, and go through the process." To suits their business model, but doesn't really exactly suit yours. But I suppose in the truthful answer is, I'm already seeing this today in terms of a lot of my engagements that I've been helping organizations with in the last year and a half have been a reformation in terms of, like, going back to what we talk about with knowledge graph and graph, about how they're using data in the completely new ways, which is basically using an analogy of, in the past, most organizations have used data. Now, I'm just generalizing here, like in data warehouses, where things are like, like in spreadsheets, which are basically represented as rows and columns. But now the new way of working with data, like with AI and graph, is basically like a spider web, like nodes and edges. So that whole ways of working isn't, you don't go from a transformation going from columns and rows and do your business process to put them into a graph. It's a whole new way of working in terms of the data formats are different. The people who work with graph are very different to how you work with it, with warehousing and relational databases and SQL. So, and this is where I basically say to executives when I go into them, is that we're basically doing a reset in terms of how your organization needs to work with data, design data, and having it ready for AI, automation, and what Gartner's been calling graph ready. And that basically is going from A to Z, but not going sequentially. It's leapfrogging half of the steps to get you there. It's basically extracting your data that you need and then putting it into this new factory, if you want to call it, which is the AI and graph. But there's no staircase going to it. And that's where a lot of organizations need to be aware of that and also be careful of that. They don't follow consultants of, we need to do a business process analysis, we need to do X, Y, Z. No, you don't. And to your point, Tim, there's tools out there that basically will basically extract and accelerate you to where you need to be, whether it be AI ready or RAG ready, whatever is the case, which is going to save you time, money, and most importantly, it's going to increase value a lot faster than the typical transformation process that used to be the way to go. So it's already here, but the thing that I'm very wary of is that there's not many people with experience who actually know how to do it.
And there aren't many people with experience because it's brand new. And this is going to be a very difficult narrative to navigate as an incumbent executive manager who has been incentivized to maintain the status quo. And this is again where the nuance of the corporate dynamic is important, because the reality of the evolution of an organization is that businesses are started by entrepreneurs who are challengers. They look at organizations and they look at markets and they say, we're going to do things differently. They gain a foothold, they do things differently, they offer more value to customers than the incumbents. They scale, and then typically what happens is those businesses mature, the entrepreneurs leave and they get replaced by managers. And the managers mandate, the primary focus for the manager, the corporate manager, is to maintain the status quo and not to take risks. So you've got a moment that we need to appreciate right now where businesses have got this opportunity to reform. And if they don't reform, and while they aren't reforming, the startup ecosystem of people coming to take their lunch away from them is going to grow faster than it's ever grown. And the price pressure is going to be more severe than it's ever been, because the concept of the one-man unicorn is a concept that has been bounded around a lot at the moment, which is to say, for the first time in the history of business, it's possible that a single person using AI tooling can conceivably build on their own $1 billion business. Now, why can they do that? And what is the cost of labor of a single person building a $1 billion business? Well, I can tell you it's not $1 billion. So what does that mean for the cost of the commodity on the other side? It's going to come down. So price pressure as a result of highly efficient, highly AI leveraged businesses is going to be a function of the market in the next few years. So look, probably a good place for us to wrap up. I think we've probably got in our audience you see a bit of information overload in a very short amount of time. But I think the reality is change is coming fast. And the thing to do, the thing that everybody can do right now, if you don't know where to start, is knowledge. Empower yourself with knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for people who are feeling overwhelmed, how to make this easier, the honest answer is this cannot be made easier in terms of you need to Tim's point, you need to arm yourself with knowledge, because of this. It won't go away. It won't slow down. It's just getting faster and faster, but it will become clearer. The clarity will become there once you understand the concepts, and Tim and I help you navigate in terms of the hyperscalers, the tools, the data, the governance, the guardrails. It's amazing how quickly you'll be able to then become a lot more clear in terms of design, use cases, and value, and the AI doesn't then become this huge sort of whitewash of information and data points. It becomes a series of knowledge chunks that you can bring down that we're going to transform into nuggets for you. So bear with us in these first few episodes, but especially those who are new to a lot of the terminology. It does become easier, but we want to at least frame with you in this first episode just what's going on, what's happening in terms of news. There's events, there's conferences, as well as what Tim and I have done from our experience to help position you where you need to be. And with all those, you can pick and choose what you need at different points of time. You can go back to it, as well as use it as a shopping basket of taking what you have. As when somebody asks you a question, you can come to this as a reference card as well. So a lot of things to cover, and as well as that, we'll start doing some deep dives in future podcasts. So for those with podcast requests for issues, fire away to us. Tim and I will take those on board as we start getting deep into certain areas of requests and deep dives.
Wonderful. And all relevant media sources and comments that we've made during this, there will be in the show notes below. So just have a look at those show notes. That will also connect through to the website, our LinkedIn presence as well. And we want to learn together. So tell us what you're struggling with, and we'll try to customize some content around that as well. Been wonderful having you with us today, and we look forward to chatting again next week.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week and enjoy the AI merry-go-round next week, and we'll catch up with what's new and greatest in terms of the AI developments same
and
time.
It's Gartner in a couple of weeks. When's that, Sean?
Exactly.
2 weeks time, yeah.
Exactly. For those, we'll cover. Well, actually, next week, Tim. Let's do the agendas out there. So let's skim over the agenda for next week. For those of you who are going to be in Sydney for the Gartner Data and Analytics, or you can basically call it the AI data. In Sydney on the I think it's the 15th or 16th, whatever, the Monday to Wednesday. Tim and I are both there. So for those of you going to be in Sydney, ping us. We'll like to catch up for a coffee. But next week we'll skim over the agenda, look at some interesting topics they're going to be covering, and as well as what's the research going to be looking at, and then dive into next week. So exciting stuff. Lot to get into.
Wonderful. Fantastic weekends, everybody, and chat again soon.
Enjoy.
Bye.